The sky was the color of ash, a perpetual twilight that had long forgotten the brilliance of true sunlight. Dust particles danced in the still air, visible only when they passed through the rare beams of light that managed to penetrate the thick atmospheric haze. This was what remained of Nexus City, once a thriving interplanetary trading hub, now reduced to a wasteland of twisted metal and crumbling structures. Locals had taken to calling it the alien graveyard, not because many had died here, but because it was where things came to be forgotten. Albert pulled his filtration mask tighter against his face as the wind picked up, carrying with it the toxic particles that had made this place uninhabitable for all but the most desperate. His weathered hands, covered in makeshift gloves with the fingertips cut away for better dexterity, adjusted the straps of his backpack. The radiation counter on his wrist gave a soft beep, a warning, but not danger. Not yet. 20 years as a scavenger had taught Albert to recognize the signs of danger before any device could. The way certain metals corroded, the particular shade of fungal growth on abandoned organic matter, the sound the wind made when it passed through unstable structures. These were his real warning systems. His body, once strong and upright, now moved with a permanent hunch, as if perpetually bracing against an invisible weight. His face was a map of hardships endured, deep lines around eyes that had seen too much, skin weathered by toxic winds, and a perpetual grimace that had once been a smile. Albert moved methodically through the ruins, his eyes constantly scanning for anything of value. A torn piece of thermal fabric here, a power cell there. Survival in the graveyard meant collecting what others considered worthless. His breathing was labored not from exertion, but from the ever-present heaviness in his chest. A mixture of dust accumulated in his lungs over decades and the weight of memories he couldn't shake. Another day in paradise, he muttered to himself, a ritual phrase that had lost its irony years ago. The ruins of a massive transport hub loomed ahead, its once graceful arches now jagged teeth against the gray sky. Albert had avoided this area for months, too unstable, too many blind spots where predators could hide. But his usual scavenging grounds were yielding less and less, and hunger was a more immediate concern than caution. He had just begun to explore the outer perimeter of the hub when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the groan of settling metal, not the hiss of escaping gas from pressurized containers that had somehow survived years of neglect. This was different, rhythmic, organic, breathing. Albert froze, his hand automatically moving to the makeshift blade at his belt. 20 years of survival instincts told him to turn around, to avoid whatever was making that sound. Nothing good came from unexpected encounters in the graveyard. But something else, something older than his survival instincts, something he thought had died long ago, made him pause. He followed the sound, moving carefully through the debris. The breathing was shallow, labored, the sound of someone or something barely clinging to life. As he rounded a collapsed pillar, he saw her. She was half buried under debris, only her upper body visible. Her skin was a pale lavender, almost translucent in places, with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse faintly with her breathing. Her hair, a deeper purple that bordered on black, fell in tangled strands around a face that was unmistakably feminine despite its alien features. Her eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangular pattern, were closed, her facial features contorted in pain. A soft bioluminescent glow emanated from patterns along her exposed arms and neck, pulsing weakly with each breath. Albert recognized her species immediately, Lyrian, a race known for their advanced technology and reclusive nature. What one was doing here, alone and injured in the graveyard, was beyond comprehension. His first instinct was to back away. Lyrians were trouble. Their technology was valuable, which made them targets. And helping one would mean putting himself at risk, expending precious resources, exposing himself to whoever had left her here. The logical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 2 decades in this hellscape, was screaming at him to walk away. But then her eyes opened. 2 lateral ones first, a deep amethyst color, followed by the central one, milky white, possibly blind. They found him immediately, and Albert felt something he hadn't experienced in years: connection. In those alien eyes, he saw fear, pain, and a desperate will to live that mirrored his own. "Damn it," he muttered, already knowing he would regret what he was about to do. He approached cautiously, hands raised to show he meant no harm. The Lyrian girl flinched, a small whimper escaping her lips. "I won't hurt you," Albert said, knowing she probably couldn't understand him, but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. "I'm going to help you, okay?" He began carefully removing the debris covering her. As more of her body was revealed, he understood why she had been left here. From the waist down, her body was atrophied, the legs thin and clearly non-functional. A paralyzed Lyrian, abandoned in the most dangerous place imaginable. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Memories surfaced, unwanted, painful. Another time, another person he couldn't save. His crew member, Talia, pinned under collapsed equipment after their ship crashed. His choice to leave her behind when the emergency beacon attracted scavengers. Her screams as he ran, promising to return with help that he never found. "Not this time," he said, more to himself than to the Lyrian girl. "Not again." A distant rumble caught his attention, a dust storm approaching. They needed shelter, and fast. With gentle movements, he slipped his arms under the Lyrian girl's body. She was lighter than he expected, her body seeming almost hollow beneath the strange fabric that covered her. "I need to move you," he explained, again knowing she couldn't understand. "Storm coming." To his surprise, she nodded slightly, her central eye closing in what seemed like resignation or possibly trust. Albert lifted her as carefully as he could, wincing at her sharp intake of breath when her lower body shifted. The closest shelter was a maintenance tunnel he had discovered months ago, defensible with only one entrance, and somehow still structurally sound. Moving quickly but carefully with his fragile cargo, Albert made his way through the ruins as the wind began to intensify. Particulate matter swirled around them, stinging his exposed skin. The Lyrian girl buried her face against his chest, her breathing becoming more labored as the toxic atmosphere affected her more severely than him. They reached the tunnel just as the storm hit in earnest. Albert ducked inside, placing the girl gently against the far wall before turning to secure the makeshift barrier he had constructed on previous visits. The howling of the wind was muffled now, the worst of the storm kept at bay. In the dim light of his scavenged glow stick, Albert got his first good look at the Lyrian. She was young. It was hard to tell with aliens, but she had the appearance of someone barely into adulthood. Her clothing was of fine quality, or had been before exposure to the graveyard's harsh environment. Most notably, around her neck was a device he recognized as a translator, standard issue for Lyrians who engaged in trade with other species. "Can you understand me?" he asked, pointing to the device. The girl's hand weakly moved to the translator, activating it with a touch. "Yes," came the reply, the voice artificially flat from the translation. "Why? Help me." Albert busied himself with pulling supplies from his pack, avoiding her question and the complicated answer it demanded. "You're hurt. What happened to you?" The girl was silent for so long that Albert thought she might have passed out. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that the translator barely picked it up. "My family left me. I am defective." Albert's hands stilled on the water container he was opening. "They left you here, in the graveyard, because you're paralyzed?" The central eye closed again, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as affirmation. Lyrians, perfect bodies, no place for broken ones. Anger flared in Albert, hot and unfamiliar after years of emotional numbness. What kind of people would leave their own child to die in a toxic wasteland because she couldn't walk? "Well, they're idiots," he said bluntly, holding the water container to her lips. "Drink." Slowly, as she sipped, Albert assessed her condition. No obvious external injuries beyond scrapes and bruises, but her breathing was concerning, shallow, and irregular. Without medical training or equipment, there wasn't much he could do beyond basic care. I'm Albert, he said, feeling the strange weight of sharing his name after years of speaking to no one. The girl finished drinking and looked at him with those haunting eyes. Lyrie, she replied, the translator rendering her name in a pronunciation he could manage. Well, Lyrie, we're going to wait out this storm, and then I'll figure out what to do with you. He tried to sound gruff, matter-of-fact, as if helping her was just another scavenging decision rather than the first truly human thing he had done in decades. Why? She asked again, persistent. Why help? Burden. Albert unrolled his sleeping pad, placing it beside her and gently helping her onto the marginally more comfortable surface. Get some rest, he said, ignoring her question. Storm might last hours. As Lyrie's eyes slowly closed, Albert settled himself against the opposite wall, keeping watch. The question echoed in his mind. Why help her? She was right. In the brutal calculus of survival in the graveyard, she was a burden. Food, water, attention, all diverted to someone who couldn't contribute to survival. He glanced at her sleeping form, at the gentle pulse of bioluminescence that seemed to follow her heartbeat. The answer came to him not in words, but in the face of another woman, long dead. Talia's final expression as he abandoned her to save himself, not anger, but disappointment. As if she had expected better of him, even at the end. Because I'm tired of surviving at the cost of my humanity, he whispered to the sleeping alien. Even if it kills me. The storm raged on outside, but for the first time in years, Albert felt something other than the dull ache of survival. It was dangerous, this feeling. More dangerous than any storm or predator in the graveyard. It felt like purpose. The storm persisted for nearly 2 days, forcing Albert and Lyrie to remain in the cramped maintenance tunnel longer than he had anticipated. His supplies, meticulously rationed for one, stretched dangerously thin between two. But the extended confinement had an unexpected benefit. It gave him time to assess and improve their shelter for long-term habitation. This place secure? Lyrie asked on the 3rd morning, her translator rendering her question with slightly better inflection than before. She seemed to be adapting to it, learning how to modulate her natural speech patterns to produce more natural translations. Albert nodded, securing a piece of scavenged metal over a crack in the ceiling. One in trance, easily defended. Solid structure, good ventilation without letting in too much toxicity. He paused. It's not much, but it's safer than most places in the graveyard. Your home? She asked, watching him work with interest. I don't have a home, Albert replied, the words coming out harsher than he intended. I have places I stay until they become unsafe. Then I move on. Lyrie absorbed this, her 3 eyes blinking in sequence. A gesture he was learning indicated thoughtfulness. Nomadic survival. Efficient for single individual. Yeah, well, that's changed now, hasn't it? He immediately regretted the words when he saw her central eye close in what he now recognized as distress. I understand. Burden. When recovered. You leave me. Albert set down his tools and faced her directly. That's not what I meant. I'm not leaving you. I'm saying we need to adapt. Make this place more than just a temporary shelter. He gestured around them. This could be defensible with some work. Near enough to scavenging grounds. Far enough from the worst radiation zones. A home? Lyrie asked, her lateral eyes widening slightly. A base of operations, Albert corrected, uncomfortable with the sentiment behind home. First priority is getting you healthy. Then we figure out the rest. The next few days established a routine. Each morning, Albert would venture out to scavenge, returning by midday with whatever supplies he could find. Afternoons were spent reinforcing their shelter and tending to Lyrie's needs. To his surprise, she improved rapidly. Lyrian physiology apparently possessed impressive regenerative capabilities when given even minimal support. Communication grew easier as Lyrie mastered her translator and Albert became accustomed to her speech patterns. She possessed a sharp intelligence and an unexpected knowledge of technology that proved invaluable. When Albert returned with scavenged components, Lyrie could often identify their function and potential uses better than he could. This one, she said one afternoon, holding up a small cylindrical object Albert had thought was merely a power coupling. Atmospheric filter. Can improve air quality here. Under her guidance, Albert installed the component in their ventilation system. The difference was immediate. The air became noticeably cleaner, the perpetual burning in his lungs easing for the first time in years. "How do you know all this?" he asked her later that evening as they shared a meal of reconstituted protein packs, a lucky find from an abandoned emergency shelter. Lyrie's bioluminescent patterns dimmed slightly, a reaction Albert had come to associate with sadness or discomfort. Was to be engineer. Before, her hands gestured toward her non-functional lower body. "What happened?" Albert asked, then quickly added, "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." "Birth defect. Rare among Lyrians. Spinal formation. Incorrect." Her central eye closed. In ancient times, infants like me, exposed to elements. Modern times, medical termination. I survived because parents hoped for correction through surgery. Albert listened in horror as Lyrie explained how her parents had spent years and fortunes seeking cures, becoming increasingly desperate and resentful as each treatment failed. How Lyrian society, built on ideals of perfection and contribution, had little place for those with permanent disabilities. How, when she reached adulthood and the final experimental treatment failed, her family had made the cold calculation that she was no longer worth the resources. They said, vacation, medical retreat. Her bioluminescence pulsed erratically with emotion. Sedated me. Woke up here alone. Realized, not meant to wake up at all. They left you to die, Albert said, anger making his voice shake. Their own daughter. Lyrian way. Practical. Unsentimental. She looked up at him, all three eyes open and focused. Why different for you? Why risk yourself for stranger? For burden? Albert was silent for a long moment, staring into the small heating unit that provided their warmth. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I was a pilot. Commercial transport. Good at my job, decent crew. We were making a run from the central systems to the outer colonies when our ship was hit by debris from an unreported meteor shower. He hadn't told this story in 20 years, had almost convinced himself it had happened to someone else. Emergency systems failed. We crashed here, back when this place was just starting to go bad, not the complete wasteland it is now. Lyrie listened silently as Albert described the crash, the deaths of most of his crew on impact, and the desperate days that followed with the few survivors. There were 4 of us left. Me, the first officer Talia, and 2 engineers. We had an emergency beacon, limited supplies. Thought rescue would come. His laugh was bitter. What we didn't know was that the company had already written us off as lost. Cheaper to collect the insurance than mount a rescue in a deteriorating environment. He described how the beacon had attracted not rescuers, but scavengers, desperate people already living in the early stages of the graveyard, looking for anything of value. How they had attacked the crash site. How in a chaos Talia had been pinned under collapsed equipment. I could have stayed, tried to help her. But I ran. The words felt like acid. Left her there screaming my name. Told myself I'd find help, come back for her. But there was no help to find. And by the time I worked up the courage to return, there was nothing left of her to save. Albert looked up, meeting Lyrie's gaze. The others died within the first year. Disease, violence, accidents. I survived because I became hard, practical, unsentimental. He used her word deliberately. I've spent 20 years telling myself it was the only way to stay alive. And maybe it was. But when I saw you there, I realized survival wasn't enough anymore. I don't want to just survive if it means leaving another person to die. The shelter was silent except for the soft hum of the heating unit and the distant howl of the toxic wind outside. Lyrie's bioluminescence had settled into a steady, gentle pulse. Not burden, she finally said. Partner, will contribute. Her hand reached out, hesitantly, and rested on his arm. We'll help you find humanity again. Albert didn't pull away from the touch, though every instinct told him to maintain distance, to not form attachments that would make survival harder. Instead, he nodded once, a silent acceptance of her promise. That night, as Lyrie slept, Albert found himself making plans beyond the next days, scavenging for the first time in decades. Their shelter needed better security, more stable power. They needed a more reliable water purification system. And, most challenging of all, they needed to find a way to give Lyrie mobility. The thought came to him just before sleep claimed him. There were rumors of a place deep in the heart of the graveyard, a black market where anything could be found for the right price. He had always avoided it, the risks too great for the potential rewards when he had only himself to worry about. But now, with Lyrie's breath a soft rhythm in the darkness beside him, the calculation had changed. Tomorrow, he would begin gathering information. There had to be technology out there that could help her walk again, and he would find it, whatever the cost. The next weeks saw their shelter transform. With Lyrie's engineering knowledge and Albert's scavenging skills, they created a space that was more than just survivable. It was almost comfortable. A more efficient power system harvested energy from the ambient radiation that permeated the graveyard. Water purifiers extracted moisture from the air and filtered it to drinkable standards. Security systems, cobbled together from scavenged sensors and alarms, provided early warning of approaching threats. Lyrie's health continued to improve. Her upper body strength increased as she took on more tasks within their shelter, manipulating tools and components with a dexterity that impressed Albert. She taught him about Lyrian technology, and he shared his knowledge of survival in the graveyard. They developed a rhythm, a partnership that felt almost natural despite their fundamental differences. But Albert had not forgotten his plan. Each day, as he scavenged, he also gathered information. Careful questions to the few other permanent inhabitants of the graveyard he occasionally encountered, observations of traffic patterns in the more active areas, listening for rumors and whispers. Deep Market, an elderly scavenger finally told him, after Albert had traded a valuable power cell for information. That's what you're looking for. But you don't want to go there, son. Place like that will eat a loner like you alive. Where is it? Albert pressed, ignoring the warning. The old man studied him through milky eyes. Underground. Old subway system beneath what used to be the commercial district. Entrance changes, but there's always a guide at the old Central Station ruins if you have something worth their while. He leaned closer. What are you after that's worth that risk? Albert simply nodded his thanks and walked away, the coordinates of the Central Station already logged in his mind. That night, he shared his findings with Lyrie. Deep Market, she repeated, her bioluminescence flickering with recognition. Heard whispers. Black Market. Dangerous. Yes, Albert confirmed, laying out the supplies he had been secretly accumulating for this purpose. But if there's anywhere in the graveyard we might find advanced prosthetics or mobility tech for you, it's there. Lyrie's 3 eyes widened in sequence. 4. Me? You seek this for me. You can't spend the rest of your life in this shelter, Albert said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You need to be able to move independently, to have freedom. Dangerous journey, she objected, her central eye closing in concern. Many would kill for what you carry. Albert had indeed amassed a small fortune in graveyard terms. Power cells, rare metals, medical supplies, all things that would serve as currency in the Deep Market. It represented months of careful scavenging, items set aside when they could have improved their immediate comfort. Worth the risk, he said firmly. Why? Lyrie asked, the same question she had asked when he first rescued her, but with a different weight now. Albert busied himself with organizing his pack, avoiding her gaze. Because you deserve to walk again. To have choices. Albert, she said, using his name in her actual voice rather than through the translator, the sound strange and musical. Look at me. He did, reluctantly. Not about deserve. About worth risk to you. What? The question hung between them, forcing Albert to confront feelings he had been carefully avoiding acknowledging. In the weeks they had spent together, Lyrie had become more than just someone to save, more than a partner in survival. She had become the first person in 20 years who knew him, who saw past the hardened scavenger to the man beneath. She made him laugh, challenged his thinking, gave him purpose beyond the next meal or safe place to sleep. Because you matter to me, he finally said, the words feeling inadequate. Because I'm better with you than without you. And because if there's a chance you can walk again, I have to try to give that to you. Lyrie's bioluminescence brightened dramatically, patterns pulsing in what he had come to recognize as joy or excitement. Then we prepare. Together. The next 3 days were spent in careful preparation. Lyrie modified Albert's gear, integrating protective elements and enhancing his ancient radiation shield with techniques known only to Lyrians. Albert drilled her on emergency protocols. What to do if he didn't return within the expected time frame, how to defend the shelter, which other scavengers might be trustworthy enough to approach for help. On the morning of his departure, Lyrie presented him with a final gift, a small communication device she had assembled from scavenged parts. Short range, she explained as she showed him how to wear it discreetly in his ear. But if within 5 kilometers, can speak to me. Hear me. Albert took the device with careful hands, recognizing the hours of intricate work it represented. Thank you, he said simply. The goodbye was brief, neither of them comfortable with expressing the emotions roiling beneath the surface. Albert checked his gear one final time, secured the shelter entrance, and set out toward the heart of the graveyard. The journey to the central station took nearly a full day, forcing Albert to navigate increasingly dangerous territory. The closer he got to the center, the more signs of recent activity he encountered. Fresh tracks in the dust, scavenging sites stripped clean, occasional glimpses of distant figures moving through the ruins. He moved carefully, using all the stealth skills he had developed over 2 decades, avoiding open spaces and keeping to shadows. The central station itself was a massive structure of twisted metal and crumbling concrete, once the hub of the city's transportation network. Now it stood as a skeletal monument to forgotten prosperity, its grand arches reaching toward the ash-colored sky like supplicating hands. Albert approached cautiously, scanning for the guide the old scavenger had mentioned. For nearly an hour, he observed from concealment, until he spotted a pattern, a small light that appeared at regular intervals near what had once been the main entrance, visible only from a particular angle. A signal. Checking his weapons and ensuring his valuables were secure but accessible, Albert approached the light. As he drew nearer, a figure materialized from the shadows, humanoid, but clearly not human. Its skin was a mottled gray, eyes covered by complex goggles that whirred softly as they adjusted to Albert's presence. Business? The figure asked, its voice a mechanical rasp. I seek the deep market, Albert replied steadily. I have items to trade. The goggles scanned him thoroughly. Payment for entry is separate from trade within. Show entry value. Albert carefully extracted a small power cell. Valuable, but not irreplaceable. The guide's gloved hand shot out with surprising speed, grasping the cell and examining it before nodding once. Follow. Deviation from path means death. The journey into the underground network was a disorienting maze of collapsed tunnels, makeshift bridges over seemingly bottomless chasms, and narrow passages where the walls pressed in so close that Albert had to turn sideways to proceed. The guide moved with the confidence of absolute familiarity, never hesitating at intersections or checking for landmarks. Finally, after what felt like hours, they emerged into a vast subterranean chamber that took Albert's breath away. The deep market sprawled before him, a chaotic tapestry of light and sound. Hundreds of makeshift stalls and trading posts filled the ancient subway platform and tracks, illuminated by a patchwork of power sources that cast everything in a shifting, multicolored glow. Beings of all species moved through the crowd. Humans, aliens, even artificial constructs operating independently. Market follows old rules, the guide informed him. Violence against traders forbidden. Cheating punished. Fair value expected. A mechanical hand pointed to a symbol branded into the wall, a stylized scale. Market justice watches. Is swift. Is final. With that ominous warning, the guide melted back into the tunnel, leaving Albert alone at the edge of the underground bazaar. I'm in, he whispered to the communication device, hoping Lyrie could hear him despite the distance and interference. Careful, came her voice, faint but distinguishable. Trust no one. Albert moved into the market, keeping his posture confident but not challenging, eyes constantly scanning for threats and opportunities. The variety of goods on display was staggering. Everything from basic survival supplies to advanced weapons, from intoxicants to medical technology that wouldn't have looked out of place in a core system hospital. He passed several stalls offering prosthetics, but none that seemed advanced enough for Lyrie's needs. Most were mechanical, designed for utility rather than natural movement, and none appeared compatible with Lyrian physiology. After nearly 2 hours of careful exploration, Albert found himself in a section of the market that seemed dedicated to medical technology. Here, the traders were different, cleaner, more clinical in their appearance and manner. One stall in particular caught his attention, not for its display, which was minimal compared to its neighbors, but for the trader herself. She was clearly Severian, a species known for their medical expertise and ethical flexibility. Her silver skin gleamed in the dim light, 6-fingered hands constantly in motion as she manipulated holographic displays showing complex anatomical structures. "You seek something specific," she said as Albert approached, a statement rather than a question. Her voice had the characteristic musical quality of Severians, making even simple observations sound like the beginning of a song. "Mobility technology," Albert replied. "Advanced. For a Lyrian with lower body paralysis." The Severian's entirely black eyes widened slightly, the only indication of surprise on her otherwise impassive face. "Lyrian client? Unusual." Her head tilted. "More unusual that someone cares enough to seek help for paralyzed Lyrian. Their own kind would not." "I'm not Lyrian," Albert said simply. Evidently, the Severian studied him for a long moment, then gestured to a curtained area behind her stall. "Show what you bring. We'll determine if worth my attention." Behind the curtain, the Severian's true operation was revealed, a small but sophisticated medical facility, far more advanced than anything Albert had seen since before the crash. Holographic displays showed detailed anatomical models of various species, while sealed containers held biological and mechanical components he couldn't begin to identify. "I am Dr. Vina," the Severian introduced herself, emphasizing her title with pride. "What you seek is possible. Difficult, expensive, but possible." Albert carefully displayed his collection of valuables. Dr. Vina examined each item with professional detachment, occasionally setting one aside for closer inspection. When he had shown everything, she leaned back, fingers steepled beneath her chin. "Insufficient," she declared. "Value approximately 60% of requirement." Albert's heart sank. He had brought everything of value he could safely transport. What would make up the difference? "Service," Dr. Vina replied immediately, as if she had anticipated the question. "I require specific component. Rare. Dangerous to acquire. Located in restricted area of old research facility, northeastern quadrant of graveyard." "What kind of component?" Albert asked warily. "Quantum neural interface. Small. Heavily protected." Dr. Vina's black eyes fixed on him intently. "Protected because valuable. Valuable because restricted. Restricted because dangerous in wrong hands. In your hand are the right ones?" Albert couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. The Severian's mouth curved in what might have been a smile on a human face. "My hands heal. Component will serve medical purpose. Cannot say more. If I get this component, you'll provide the prosthetic system for the Lyrian?" "Full mobility suite," Dr. Vina confirmed. "Custom designed. Self-maintaining. Permanent solution." She held up a 6-fingered hand. "We'll prepare while you retrieve component. Return within 3 days or deal void." Albert considered the offer. The northeastern quadrant was notorious, heavily irradiated, patrolled by automated security systems left over from before the collapse, home to some of the most desperate and dangerous inhabitants of the graveyard. The chance of success was slim, the chance of survival even slimmer. But he thought of Lyrie, confined to their shelter, dependent on him for every venture outside. He thought of her intelligence, her spirit, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond to her will. 3 days of danger against a lifetime of freedom for her. "I'll do it," he said. Tell me exactly what I'm looking for and where. The Severian provided detailed instructions, along with a small scanning device that would help identify the component. As Albert prepared to leave, she called after him. Curious, she said, those black eyes seeming to see through him. Why risk so much for Lyrian? Albert paused at the curtain. Because she deserves better than what her world gave her, he said simply, and stepped back into the chaos of the market. The journey to the northeastern quadrant was grueling. Albert moved as quickly as caution would allow, aware of the ticking clock. 3 days to reach the facility, locate the component, and return to the deep market. It would be close, even if everything went perfectly. Nothing went perfectly. The first setback came in the form of a radiation storm, not uncommon in the graveyard, but particularly intense in this quadrant. Albert lost nearly half a day sheltering in the hollow of a fallen structure, his radiation shield struggling to compensate for the increased levels. Status. Lyrie's voice came through the communicator, barely audible through the interference caused by the storm. Delayed but alive, Albert replied, huddled in the makeshift shelter. How are things there? Secure. Working on project to surprise you. There was a warmth in her voice that the static couldn't disguise. Be careful. When the storm finally passed, Albert pushed on through landscape that became increasingly alien. This had been the technological heart of the city, where the most advanced research facilities had been located. The collapse had transformed it into a twisted nightmare of broken buildings and failed experiments. Strange growths that might have been plant, animal, or something entirely artificial clung to structures. Lights flickered in patterns that hurt the eyes if watched too long. The air itself seemed charged with potential energy. The facility Dr. Vina had described was once a neuroscience research center, its facade still bearing the faded logo of a corporate entity long gone. Now it stood as a broken tooth in the jagged skyline, its lower levels flooded with toxic sludge, its upper stories partially collapsed. Albert approached cautiously, scanner in hand. The device led him to a side entrance. Once emergency only, now the main way in, as the grand lobby had been crushed under fallen debris. The door was sealed, but showed signs of being forced repeatedly over the years. Careful application of his makeshift pry bar added another set of marks and granted him entry. Inside, emergency lighting still functioned sporadically, casting the corridors in an eerie red glow. The scanner led him deeper into the facility, up staircases where every step threatened to give way, through laboratories where equipment lay shattered alongside unidentifiable organic remains. The security systems were still active in places, automated turrets that tracked movement, identity scanners that triggered lockdowns when they failed to recognize authorized personnel. Albert avoided some, disabled others, and in one heart-stopping instance, was forced to sprint through an activated field of electrical discharge that left his right side numb for hours afterward. By the time he reached the secure laboratory indicated on the scanner, he was exhausted, injured, and running dangerously low on supplies. The door to the lab was unlike others in the facility, intact, sealed, with a security system that still appeared fully functional. Problem, he reported to Lyrie. Security barrier. Advanced. Describe, she requested. Albert detailed the security panel, the material of the door, the warning symbols still clearly visible despite years of neglect. Can bypass, Lyrie said after a moment. Listen carefully. For the next 20 minutes, she guided him through a complex sequence of overrides, using her knowledge of similar Lyrian systems to identify weaknesses in the human-designed security. Albert's fingers, normally so steady when disarming traps or manipulating delicate salvage, trembled slightly as he followed her instructions. One mistake could trigger lethal countermeasures. Final sequence. Lyrie's voice came through, calm and focused. 371 pause 94 he said. Albert input the sequence, holding his breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a series of mechanical clicks and a hiss of equalizing pressure, the door slid open. You did it, he whispered, relief making his voice shake. We did it, she corrected. Be careful. What inside? The laboratory beyond the door, was in startling contrast to the rest of the facility. Where everything else had been decay and destruction, this room was pristine, preserved by the security systems and independent power supply. Workstations lined the walls, their screens dark but intact. In the center of the room stood a cylindrical chamber, transparent walls revealing complex equipment within. Albert approached cautiously, scanner in hand. The device led him to a small case on one of the workstations. It was secured with another lock, but this one was simple compared to the door, designed to prevent casual tampering rather than serious infiltration. With Lyrie's guidance, he bypassed this final security measure and opened the case. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was an object no larger than his thumb, a translucent cube that seemed to shift colors as he looked at it, containing intricate patterns that rearranged themselves continuously. "The quantum neural interface," he murmured, carefully lifting it from its housing. The scanner confirmed it was the target component. "Got it." "Good," Lyrie responded, relief evident in her voice. "Now, get out. Quickly." Albert secured the component in a padded container, then turned to leave. He had taken only 3 steps when the laboratory's lights suddenly flared to full brightness, temporarily blinding him. When his vision cleared, he found himself facing a new obstacle. A security drone hovered in the doorway, its cylindrical body bristling with sensors and what were unmistakably weapons. It had clearly been dormant elsewhere in the facility, awakened by the breach of the secure lab. "Unauthorized access detected," came a synthetic voice from the drone. "Security protocol in effect. Surrender stolen property immediately." Albert's hand moved slowly toward his weapon. The drone's sensors tracked the movement, weapon ports rotating to target him. "Hostile intent detected. Lethal force authorized." "Albert," Lyrie's voice came through the communicator, tense with worry. "What happening?" "Security drone," he replied quietly. "Armed. Blocking exit." There was a moment of silence. Then Lyrie spoke rapidly. "Can override. Need to access control panel. Located at base of unit. Need 30 seconds uninterrupted contact." Albert assessed the situation. The drone hovered 2 meters off the ground, its attention focused entirely on him. To reach its underside, he would need to get past its weapons, somehow flip or immobilize it, and then maintain contact with its control panel while it undoubtedly attempted to eliminate him. "Any other options?" he asked. "No," came the grim reply. "Cannot remotely hack. Must be direct interface." Albert took a deep breath. "If this goes badly," he began. "Will not," Lyrie interrupted fiercely. "You will return. I will wait. Always." The simple declaration gave him strength. Without further hesitation, Albert launched himself toward the drone, ducking under its first volley of energy bursts. He rolled behind a workstation as the drone fired again, the blast reducing the equipment to smoldering ruins. Using the smoke as cover, Albert circled around, flanking the drone. It rotated to track him, but its bulk made it slower to turn than he was to move. He leapt onto a desk, then sprang toward the drone, grasping its upper section as momentum carried them both against the wall. The impact stunned the drone momentarily, giving Albert the chance to pull himself around to its underside. He found the access panel Lyrie had described and pressed his palm against it. "Now," he shouted into the communicator. "Initiating bypass," Lyrie responded. "Hold position." The drone recovered, spinning wildly in an attempt to dislodge him. Albert clung desperately to its frame, one hand maintaining contact with the panel while the other gripped a protruding sensor array. The drone slammed into walls, ceiling, and equipment, each impact sending pain shooting through Albert's already battered body. 15 seconds, Lyrie reported. "Almost done." A particularly violent spin threw Albert against a sharp edge of broken equipment. He felt a searing pain in his side and knew immediately that the wound was serious. Warm blood soaked his clothing, but he maintained his grip on the drone. 10 seconds. The drone's spinning became even more erratic. It fired its weapons randomly, filling the laboratory with destructive energy that rained debris down on them both. 5 seconds. Albert's vision began to blur. The loss of blood was affecting him faster than he'd expected. His grip weakened. Done. Lyrie's triumphant voice came through the communicator just as Albert's strength failed. He fell to the floor as the drone suddenly went still, hovering in place, its lights dimming to a soft blue. Drone is now loyal, Lyrie explained, sounding surprised at her own success. Can assist. Will follow commands. Good, Albert gasped, pressing his hand to the wound in his side. Because I'm going to need some help getting out of here. Under Lyrie's guidance, he commanded the drone to help him to his feet and support him as he staggered from the laboratory. The journey back through the facility was a blur of pain and dizziness. Without the drone carrying much of his weight and clearing obstacles from their path, he would never have made it out. Once outside, Albert used the last of his medical supplies to stabilize the wound temporarily. It wasn't nearly enough, but it might keep him alive long enough to reach the deep market. Status? Lyrie asked, her voice now constantly in his ear. Bad, he admitted, no longer seeing any point in hiding the truth from her. But moving, can make it to Vina. The return journey was torture. Every step sent waves of pain through his body. The wound continued to seep blood despite his efforts to seal it. Twice he lost consciousness, waking to Lyrie's frantic voice in his ear, calling his name with increasing desperation. Still here, he would mumble each time. Still coming back to you. By the time he reached the entrance to the deep market, Albert was moving purely on will alone. His vision tunneled, his breathing shallow and rapid. The guide took one look at him and his drone companion and, recognizing the severity of the situation, led him directly to Dr. Vina's stall without demanding additional payment. The Severian doctor's eyes widened at the sight of him. Bring him, she commanded, gesturing to the curtained area. Quickly, Albert was barely conscious as they laid him on an examination table. His blood-stained fingers found the container with a neural interface and held it out to the doctor. The component, he managed to say, for the Lyrian. Dr. Vina took the container, examined the contents briefly, then nodded once. Agreement honored, she confirmed. Now, let me save your life. Albert surrendered to the darkness then, his last conscious thought of Lyrie waiting for him to return. When he awoke, he was still in Dr. Vina's medical facility. The pain in his side had reduced to a dull ache. Experimental movement revealed that he could sit up, though not without discomfort. 3 days, came the Severian's musical voice from beside him. You have been unconscious 3 days. Almost died twice. Impressive determination to live. Albert blinked, trying to clear the fog from his mind. The component? Acceptable. Already integrated into a prosthetic system. Dr. Vina gestured to a large container in the corner of the room. Complete as promised. Will restore full mobility to your Lyrian. Lyrie, Albert corrected, suddenly remembering the communicator. He reached for his ear, but the device was gone. Damage beyond repair, the doctor explained. You have been unable to communicate. Fear gripped Albert's heart. 3 days without contact. Lyrie would think he was dead. Would she wait? Or would she assume the worst and attempt to seek help elsewhere, putting herself at risk? I need to get back, he said, attempting to stand. Dr. Vina placed a 6-fingered hand on his chest, firmly restraining him. Not yet. One more day of healing, then can travel. Her black eyes studied him intently. She is important to you. It wasn't a question, but Albert answered anyway. Yes. Why? The same question Lyrie had asked him. This time, Albert had no hesitation in his answer. Because she sees me, not just the survivor, the scavenger. She sees the man I was, the man I could be again. And I see her, not the disability, but the brilliance, the courage, the hope. He looked directly into the Severian's alien eyes. Because I love her. Dr. Vina was silent for a long moment, then nodded as if he had confirmed something she already knew. Then rest. Heal. Return to her tomorrow. The next day, Albert departed the deep market with the prosthetic system secured on a hovering platform provided by Dr. Vina. His wound was not fully healed, but it was stable enough for travel. The doctor had given him additional medical supplies and instructions for recovery. The journey back to the shelter was slow but uneventful. The drone, which Lyrie had apparently named Guardian during their brief connection, accompanied him, helping to clear obstacles and providing protection. As they approached the final stretch, Albert found himself increasing his pace despite the pain, driven by a desperate need to see Lyrie, to assure himself that she was safe. When the shelter came into view, his heart sank. The entrance was open, debris scattered around it suggesting a struggle or hasty departure. Had she been found by scavengers? Had her family somehow returned for her? "Lyrie," he called, caution forgotten in his panic. "Lyrie, are you here?" He rushed inside, the drone following, only to stop short at the sight that greeted him. The interior of the shelter had been transformed. The walls were covered with intricate designs formed from salvaged materials, patterns that echoed Lyrie's bioluminescent markings. The ventilation system had been completely rebuilt, now drawing in air that felt cleaner than anything he had breathed in the graveyard. And most amazingly, a series of panels that hadn't been there before lined the ceiling, bathing the space in a soft light reminiscent of natural sunshine. In the center of it all, working at a makeshift bench with tools he didn't recognize, was Lyrie. She looked up at his entrance, her 3 eyes widening in shock and then joy. "Albert!" she cried, her translator rendering his name with more emotion than he had thought the device capable of. "You live." "I'm back," he confirmed, moving to her side, drinking in the sight of her. She appeared stronger, her color better, her movements more confident. "I brought it." The mobility system. Lyrie's eyes moved to the container on the hovering platform, then back to his face. She reached up, her fingers gently touching the visible edge of his bandaged wound. "You were injured. Badly." "Worth it," Albert said simply. Her bioluminescence pulsed rapidly, joy, excitement, concern all mingled together. When communication failed, feared the worst, but kept working, kept believing. She gestured around the shelter. "Improve things for your return." Albert looked around again, truly taking in the extent of the changes she had made in his absence. "How did you do all this?" "Engineer." She reminded him with what he recognized as a Lyrian smile, a subtle shift in facial expression that he had learned to read over their time together. "And found helper." As if on cue, a small maintenance bot emerged from a corner, its design clearly Lyrian, but modified with parts scavenged from the graveyard. It hummed softly as it approached, extending a manipulator arm in what seemed almost like a greeting. "Scoutbot," Lyrie explained. "Found damaged and debris nearby. Repaired. Reprogrammed. Helped gather materials, reach high places." Albert shook his head in amazement. "You're incredible." "Team," she corrected. "We incredible together." Under Dr. Vina's remote guidance, communicated through detailed instructions included with the prosthetic system, they began the process of fitting Lyrie with her new mobility. The system was a marvel of technology, a combination of exoskeletal support and neural interface that would allow her to control artificial limbs as if they were her own. The procedure was lengthy and at times painful for Lyrie, but she endured it with determination. Albert followed the doctor's instructions meticulously, aware that any error could jeopardize the success of the implantation. The quantum neural interface was the key component, forming the bridge between Lyrie's mind and the mechanical system that would respond to her thoughts. Hours passed as they worked. Outside, the perpetual twilight of the graveyard deepened to true night. Inside, illuminated by the gentle light Lyrie had created, time seemed suspended as they focused entirely on the task at hand. Finally, the last connection was made, the final calibration completed. The system hummed to life, its surface adapting to match Lyrie's skin tone so perfectly that it seemed almost a natural extension of her body. "Ready?" Albert asked, supporting her upper body as she positioned herself at the edge of her work surface. Lyrie's 3 eyes closed briefly, her expression intense with concentration. "Ready." Slowly, carefully, Albert helped her to a standing position. The prosthetic system engaged, supporting her weight, responding to her neural commands. For the first time in her life, Lyrie stood upright without assistance. I feel, she began, words failing her as emotions overwhelmed the translator's capacity. Her bioluminescence blazed with intensity, patterns flowing rapidly across her visible skin. Tentatively, she attempted a step forward. The prosthetic moved smoothly, responding to her thought as naturally as a biological limb would. Another step followed, more confident than the first. Albert moved with her, hands hovering near her arms, ready to catch her if needed, but she was steady. "I'm walking," she said, wonder and joy making her voice tremble even through the translator. "Albert, I'm walking." Step by step, she made her way around the shelter, each movement becoming more fluid as she adapted to the system and it to her. Albert watched, his own eyes blurred with tears he hadn't believed himself still capable of shedding. When she had circled the entire space, Lyrie turned to face him. Without hesitation, she walked directly to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against his chest. Albert's arms encircled her automatically, holding her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "Thank you," she whispered against him, "for everything." Albert held her tighter, careful of both his wound and her new prosthetics. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for giving me something worth living for again." They remained that way for a long time, two broken people who had found wholeness in each other against all odds. Outside, the toxic winds of the graveyard howled their endless lament for a world long gone. Inside, something new had been born from the ashes of the old. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and discovery. Lyrie grew stronger each day, her confidence with the prosthetic system increasing exponentially. What began as careful, measured steps soon became normal walking, then running, then movements that combined the natural grace of her species with the enhanced capabilities of the system. Albert's wound healed slowly but steadily under Lyrie's careful attention. Dr. Vina had provided detailed instructions for its treatment, which Lyrie followed with meticulous precision. Their roles had reversed. Now she was the one venturing out to scavenge, accompanied by Guardian and the small maintenance bot she had reprogrammed, while Albert rested and recovered. Their shelter continued to evolve, becoming more home than temporary refuge. Lyrie's engineering skills transformed scavenged junk into functional equipment, comfortable furnishings, even artwork that brightened their living space. The environmental systems she designed made their corner of the graveyard not just survivable, but almost pleasant. As Albert regained his strength, they began to venture out together. Lyrie's mobility system allowed her to navigate the difficult terrain of the graveyard with ease, sometimes more efficiently than Albert himself. Together, they explored areas he had always avoided when alone, finding resources and technology that improved their situation further. But the graveyard, for all its harshness, was not content to leave them to their happiness. 3 months after Albert's return from the deep market, the first sign of trouble appeared. They were returning from a scavenging expedition to an area Lyrie had identified as a potential source of power cells when Guardian sensors detected movement ahead, organized, purposeful movement that suggested intelligent beings rather than the mindless predators that sometimes roamed the ruins. Albert signaled for caution, and they took cover behind a collapsed wall. Through a gap in the rubble, they observed a group approaching, 6 figures in environmental suits far more sophisticated than anything typically seen in the graveyard. The suits bore insignia that made Lyrie's bioluminescence dim dramatically in recognition. Lyrian Security Force, she whispered, her body tensing beside Albert. "Elite unit. Trackers. Looking for you?" Albert asked, though he already knew the answer. Lyrie's central eye closed in affirmation. "Family powerful. Would not accept. Embarrassment of abandoned daughter surviving." They retreated carefully, taking a circuitous route back to their shelter. Once inside, Albert secured the entrance while Lyrie accessed a communication terminal she had built from salvage parts. Monitoring transmissions, she explained, fingers dancing over the controls. "Need to know purpose how they found me." The intercepted communications confirmed their fears. The Lyrian Security Force had been dispatched specifically to locate and retrieve Lyrie. Her family, upon learning of rumors that a Lyrian female was living among scavengers in the graveyard, had sent their private security force to eliminate the potential embarrassment to their social standing. "They will not stop," Lyrie said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her bioluminescent patterns. "We'll hunt until find me, or confirmation of death." Albert paced the confines of their shelter, mind racing through options. "We could go deeper into the graveyard, find somewhere more remote. No escape, l'idée plaive. Trackers specialized. Have technology to detect Lyrian biosignatures. Matter of time only. The deep market," Albert suggested. "Dr. Vina might help. Hide you, or get you off planet somehow." Lyrie considered this, but shook her head. Risk to many innocents. Market would be destroyed if resisted security force. Her eyes met his. "Must face them. Must end this." "That's suicide," Albert protested. "There are 6 of them, heavily armed and equipped. We can't fight them directly." "Not suggesting fight," Lyrie said. Her bioluminescence stabilized into a pattern he recognized as determination. "Suggesting confrontation. On our terms. With advantage." Over the next day, they developed a plan. Lyrie's knowledge of Lyrian protocols and Albert's familiarity with the graveyard's terrain would give them an edge, but the risk remained enormous. They prepared as best they could, gathering weapons, setting traps at strategic locations, programming Guardian and the maintenance bot for specific tasks. The night before they planned to implement their strategy, they sat together in the soft light of their shelter, closer than usual, the weight of tomorrow's danger pressing down on them both. "If fails," Lyrie said quietly, "want you to know, changed my life. Gave meaning, purpose." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "Gave love." Albert tightened his grip on her hand. "We're going to succeed," he said with more confidence than he felt. "But if we don't, I want you to know something too." He turned to face her fully. "Before I found you, I was just surviving, going through the motions day after day. You didn't just change my life, Lyrie. You gave it back to me." Her bioluminescence brightened, patterns flowing in what he now recognized as her expression of deep emotion. Without words, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a Lyrian gesture of intimate connection. Albert closed his eyes, committing the moment to memory, knowing it might be their last moment of peace. At dawn, they set their plan in motion. Using the communication array Lyrie had built, they broadcast a specific signal, one that would be recognized by the Lyrian security force as coming from damaged Lyrian technology. The signal originated from an area they had prepared, a semi-enclosed space with limited approaches, all of which they had rigged with non-lethal traps. "They will come," Lyrie confirmed as the signal began transmitting. "Protocol demands investigation of any Lyrian technology in unauthorized hands." Albert checked his weapons one last time, not to kill, but to disable if necessary. Their plan wasn't to defeat the security force through violence, but to create a situation where Lyrie could deliver her message directly to her family. They didn't have to wait long. Within hours, Guardian sensors detected the approach of the security team. Albert and Lyrie took their positions, hidden but with clear lines of sight to the area where the signal originated. The Lyrian security team moved with military precision, clearly experienced and well-trained. They approached the signal source cautiously, scanning for threats. When they reached the center of the prepared area, Lyrie activated the first trap. A pulse of electromagnetic energy disabled their communication equipment temporarily. Before they could regroup, Albert triggered a series of smoke deployments, filling the area with obscuring mist. In the confusion, Guardian emerged, projecting a holographic image of Lyrie that moved through the smoke, drawing the team's attention and fire. While they were distracted, the real Lyrie positioned herself on an elevated platform Albert had constructed. When the smoke began to clear, she stood fully visible, her prosthetic system gleaming in the dim light, her bioluminescence blazing in patterns designed to command attention from other Lyrians. "Security Team Alpha," she called out in her native language, the sound musical and commanding even to Albert's ears. "I am Lyrie Toth Valen, daughter of Prime Minister Valen. The person you were sent to silence. The team froze, weapons still raised, but no longer firing. Their leader stepped forward, face obscured by his environmental helmet, but posture radiating surprise. Lyrie Vallon is dead. He responded in the same language which Albert understood through the translator Lyrie had given him. Died in medical accident 3 years ago. A convenient story, Lyrie replied. The truth. Abandoned here to die because of my disability. Left as waste in a toxic graveyard. She straightened to her full height, the prosthetic system allowing her to stand proudly. But I did not die. I found life, purpose, even love. At this signal, Albert emerged from his position, moving to stand near Lyrie, Guardian hovering protectively beside them. I have recorded message, Lyrie continued. For my family. For Lyrian Council. Truth of what was done to me. What was done to others like me. She held up a data crystal that glowed with stored information. Will be broadcast to all Lyrian communication networks if I do not return shelter alive today. Will also be sent to interplanetary media. Diplomatic consequences. Severe. The security team leader conferred quickly with his squad, their private communications inaudible to Albert and Lyrie. Finally, he addressed them again. What do you want? He demanded. Simple, Lyrie replied. Official recognition that I live. Right to determine my own fate. End to practice of abandoning disabled Lyrians. Her 3 eyes focused intently on the team leader. And guarantee of safety for my companion and our home here. I do not have authority to negotiate such terms, the leader protested. Then contact one who does, Lyrie said firmly. Prime Minister will speak to daughter thought dead. Now, what followed was tense negotiation, with the security team eventually establishing communication with Lyrie's father. Albert stood by her side throughout, watching with pride as she confronted the man who had ordered her abandoned, demanding recognition and rights not just for herself, but for all Lyrians with disabilities. The conversation was long and fraught with emotion, anger, denial, eventually a grudging acknowledgement of reality. The Prime Minister, faced with the prospect of interplanetary scandal, had little choice but to agree to Lyrie's terms. A formal acknowledgement would be issued. The practice of relocating disabled Lyrians would be investigated. And most importantly, Lyrie and Albert would be left in peace, their existence neither denied nor interfered with. As the security team prepared to depart, their leader approached Lyrie directly, removing his helmet to reveal features similar to hers. I did not know, he said quietly, what we were doing, who you were. I apologize. Lyrie studied him for a moment, then nodded once. Not your crime, she replied. But remember face. Remember I lived. Tell others. When the Lyrian security force had gone, Albert and Lyrie returned to their shelter, their home. The danger had passed, but the experience had changed something between them, solidified a bond that had been growing since the day he found her among the ruins. What now? Albert asked as they stood together in the soft light of their shelter. You've won. Your existence is acknowledged. Your family can't pretend you never existed. You could leave the graveyard, go somewhere better. Lyrie turned to him, all 3 eyes focused on his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. Could, she agreed. Could go many places now. Her hand reached up to touch his cheek. But home is not place. Is person. Is you. Albert covered her hand with his own. Are you sure? There's a whole universe out there. Places without toxic air and constant danger. Places where you could use your brilliance to build something more than survival. Already building something more, she replied. Her bioluminescence pulsed in the pattern he had come to recognize as love. Here, with you, not just surviving, living. Albert pulled her close, feeling the perfect fit of her body against his, the warmth of her bioluminescence against his skin. Then we'll make our own future, he promised. Right here in the graveyard. In the months that followed, they did exactly that. Word of the Lyrian who had defied her people's practices and the human who had risked everything to help her spread through the graveyard. Others came seeking help, advice, or simply connection. Slowly, a community began to form around them. Outcasts, misfits, those abandoned or forgotten, all finding purpose in the ruins. With Lyrie's engineering genius and Albert's practical knowledge of survival, they transformed their corner of the graveyard. Environmental systems reduced toxicity levels. Power generation became reliable. Structures were reinforced, expanded, connected. What had been a wasteland began to bloom with possibility. One evening, nearly a year after confronting the Lyrian security force, Albert and Lyrie stood on a platform they had built atop their expanded shelter. Below them, lights glowed in dozens of connected structures that housed their growing community. The toxic haze that had once defined the graveyard was noticeably thinner here, thanks to Lyrie's atmospheric scrubbers. "Remember when found me?" Lyrie asked, her arm linked with his as they surveyed what they had built together. "Thought was end. Abandoned in graveyard to die." Albert nodded, pulling her closer against the evening chill. "And I thought finding you was just another burden in a life of endless struggle." Lyrie's bioluminescence rippled with amusement. "We're both wrong. Completely wrong," Albert agreed. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. It wasn't an ending for either of us. It was a beginning. Around them, the lights of their community glowed brighter as darkness fell. From one of the structures, music drifted up. Someone had salvaged an instrument and was playing a haunting melody that carried on the evening air. In the distance, the ruins of Nexus City stretched to the horizon, still broken, still dangerous, but no longer just a graveyard. "From ashes," Lyrie said softly, gesturing to the lights below, "life again." Albert smiled, truly smiled, something that had once been as foreign to him as hope. "Yes," he agreed, drawing her into his arms as stars began to appear in the clearing sky above. Life again. Together they had transformed abandonment into belonging, a graveyard into a home, and two broken souls into a love that defied worlds. In the harshest place imaginable, they had found not just survival, but a future bright with possibility. And as they stood together under the stars, Albert knew with absolute certainty that finding Lyrie in the ruins wasn't the miracle. The miracle was that in saving her, he had finally saved himself.